Hello and welcome back to Applied Anatomy and Physiology, AAP 301 for the College of Natural Health Sciences, Bermuda. My name is Dr. Delcina Bean Burrows and this is lecture number 7. And of course, we are looking at the Archer and Nelson textbook for Applied Anatomy and Physiology for manual therapists. And what you will notice in this particular lecture is that we are using a combination of the slides from the first edition as well as the second edition. So we are very happy about that. So the learning objectives for Chapter 7 are that upon completion of this chapter, you will be able to discuss the importance of understanding the anatomy and physiology of the nervous system as it relates to the practice of manual therapy. You will be able to list and explain the primary functions of the nervous system, the two major divisions, and the key structural components of each. You will name and describe the key structural components of a neuron and the different types of neurons based on structure and function. Name the different types of neuroglia, their location and functions. Describe the general structure of a nerve and explain the difference between cranial and spinal nerves. List the 4 cranial nerves manual therapists need to be most aware of and explain why. Name the 4 major nerve plexuses and the body regions they innervate. List and explain the key events of nerve impulse conduction and synaptic transmission. Explain the structure and function of a reflex arc. List 6 categories of sensory receptors, their location, and the type of stimuli to which they are sensitive. Explain the location, structure, and functions of the meninges and cerebrospinal fluid. Name the key structural features and regions of the spinal cord and explain their general functions. Name the key structural features and regions of the brain and explain their general functions. Compare and contrast the key structural features of the somatic and autonomic motor pathways of the peripheral nervous system. Name, compare, and contrast the structural features and functions of the 2 motor divisions of the autonomic nervous system, and discuss the effects of aging on the nervous system. The nervous system is the major regulatory system of the body. Along with the endocrine system, it directs and coordinates functions of every other system. In manual therapy, it is important to understand its impact of touch, pressure, and movement on the nervous system. Manual therapists need to avoid irritating the major nerves when they perform deep tissue manipulation. Let's discuss the functional organization of the nervous system. The sensory functions of the nervous system give it the ability to detect a broad spectrum of stimuli. The integrative functions of the nervous system give it the capacity to process sensory information and direct body responses. The motor functions of the nervous system allow it to process commands from the brain by way of the nerves to activate muscles, glands, and the organs. There are 2 major divisions of the nervous system: the central nervous system, or the CNS, and the peripheral nervous system, the PNS. The central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord and serves as an integration center that interprets sensory input and determines motor responses. The PNS, or the peripheral nervous system, includes the sensory receptors and nerves that detect stimuli and bring sensory information to the CNS and carry motor commands away from the central nervous system to the effectors. A neuron is made up of a cell body, dendrites, and a single axon. And here we see illustrated, beginning most superiorly, we see the dendrites, we see the cell body, the nucleus, the axon hillock, the axon, we also see the myelin, and we see the axon terminal with the synaptic bulb. Nervous tissue is composed of impulse-conducting neurons which are held together and protected by the glial cells. There are three structural elements of the neurons: the dendrites, which receive stimulus, the cell body that houses the nucleus and organelles, and the axon, which carries nerve impulses away from the cell body. Impulse conduction is carried out by way of the dendrite to the cell body and then to the axon. There are three structural types of neurons: multipolar neurons, bipolar neurons, and unipolar neurons. There are three functional types of neurons: the sensory neurons in the peripheral nervous system, the motor neurons in the peripheral nervous system, and the interneurons that are associative neurons within the CNS. Now let's discuss the neuroglia. The neuroglia support and protect the neurons. The central nervous system glial cells consist of the astrocytes, the oligodendrocytes, the microglia, and the epidermal cells. In the peripheral nervous system, the glial cells are representative of the Schwann cells and the satellite cells. Let's take a brief moment to give this pathology alert. Multiple sclerosis is a degenerative condition whereby the myelin is destroyed and replaced by scar tissue. The neuronal impulse conduction becomes impaired, and it is believed to be an autoimmune disorder. It alternates between acute inflammation and remission, and manual therapies are generally contraindicated during active cycles. However, it can be helpful during times of remission. And here we see illustrated the nerve. Axons are covered with endoneurium and are bundled together by the perineurium to form fascicles. Multiple fascicles, blood vessels, and fat are bundled together by the epineurium to form the nerve. Now let's discuss the cranial nerves. The cranial nerves are the 12 pairs of cranial nerves that originate from the brain. They deliver sensory information from the sense organs, the abdominal viscera, and the areas of the neck, chest, and face. Some provide motor control for certain muscles, and they are designated by Roman numerals in descending order. Each is named according to their function, location, or appearance. And here we see illustrated the cranial nerves. The first cranial nerve is the olfactory nerve. It is a sensory nerve only, and it carries sensory impulses from the nose to the olfactory centers in the brain. The second cranial nerve is the optic nerve. It is sensory only, and it carries sensory impulses from the eyes to the vision centers in the brain. The third cranial nerve is the oculomotor nerve. It is motor only, and it conducts motor commands to muscles that move the eyes and adjust the lens and iris of the eyes. The fourth cranial nerve is the trochlear nerve. It is motor only, and it conducts motor commands to one of the muscles that move the eyes. The fifth cranial nerve is the trigeminal nerve. It is mixed, and it carries sensory impulses from the skin of the face and from the mucosa of the nose and the mouth to the brain. It carries motor commands to the chewing muscles of the face. The sixth cranial nerve is the abducens. It is motor only, and it conducts motor commands to the external muscle that rolls the eyes laterally. The seventh cranial nerve is the facial nerve. It is mixed, and it conducts motor commands to the muscles of facial expression. It carries sensory impulses from the anterior taste buds of the tongue to the gustatory centers in the brain. The eighth cranial nerve is the vestibulocochlear nerve. It is sensory only, and it carries sensory impulses from the cochlea to the auditory centers of the brain and sensory impulses from the semicircular canal and the vestibule to the cerebellum. The Glossopharyngeal Nerve is the ninth cranial nerve. It is mixed, and it carries sensory impulses from the posterior taste buds of the tongue and pressure impulses from the baroreceptors in the carotid artery to the brain. The 10th cranial nerve is the vagus nerve. It is mixed, and it carries sensory impulses from the mouth, throat, and thoracic and abdominal viscera to the brain. It conducts motor commands to the digestive tract and the heart. The 11th cranial nerve is the accessory nerve. It is motor only, and it conducts motor commands to the CSM and the trapezius muscles. The 12th cranial nerve is the hypoglossal. It is mixed, and it conducts motor commands for movement of the tongue. The 13th cranial nerve is commonly referred to as the nervus terminalis or the terminal nerve, and it is a highly conserved multifaceted nerve found just above the olfactory bulbs in humans and most vertebrate species. In most forms, its fibers course from the rostral portion of the brain to the olfactory and nasal epithelia. Let's discuss Bell's palsy for this pathology alert. Bell's palsy is paralysis of facial muscles. It is caused by inflammation or damage to cranial nerve number 7. In most cases, it is caused by viral infection. The signs and symptoms of Bell palsy are sudden onset of weakness, drooping muscles on one side, and other symptoms. In manual therapy, it is generally indicated that it can help maintain circulation and tissue flexibility. However, we should avoid deep or vigorous manipulation of the tissue. Now let's discuss the spinal nerves. The spinal nerves are named and numbered according to their location along the spinal column. There are 31 pairs of spinal nerves. There are 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 1 coccygeal. The spinal nerves converge into common networks that innervate body regions. There are 4 major plexuses. The cervical plexus, which innervates the head, neck, and face. The brachial plexus, which innervates the upper extremities. The lumbar plexus, which innervates the lumbar region of the back and gluteus region. And the sacral plexus, which innervates the hips and lower extremities. Now let's discuss impulse conduction, the action potentials. Nerve impulses are electrochemical signals that are carried by the neurons. Neurotransmitters build chemical bridges between one neuron and another. When threshold stimulus is reached, the neuron generates an impulse, which is referred to as an action potential. There are 3 components of an action potential, beginning with depolarization, refractory period, and repolarization. Now let's discuss synaptic transmission in impulse conduction. The synapse is the junction where the electrical signal passes from one cell to another. Neurotransmitters cross the synaptic cleft. And these are chemicals such as acetylcholine, norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins. Neurotransmitters have either an excitatory or inhibitory effect. Now let's consider the neuronal pathways in impulse conduction. The neuronal pathways are one-way routes from one region to the next. Afferent neuronal pathways are sensory pathways that carry information to the brain. Efferent pathways are motor pathways that carry information away from the brain to the motor area. A reflex arc is a simple neuronal pathway for reflexes. The neuronal pools and circuits are complex networks of sensory, associative, and motor neurons. We have convergent neuronal pools and circuits, which are voluntary and involuntarily controlled, and we also have divergent neuronal pools and circuits, and these have systemic effects. Let's take a moment to consider neural compression and tension syndromes for this pathology alert. Conditions such as sciatica, thoracic outlet syndrome, and carpal tunnel syndrome are examples of tension syndromes and compression syndromes. The tight fascia and/or muscle spasms can cause peripheral nerves to be compressed. The signs and symptoms are numbness or tingling, muscle weakness, decreased coordination, chronic aching, and pain. Manual therapy can help relieve pain and dysfunction, but we must first rule out severe neurologic causes. Now let's consider the peripheral nervous system. The sensory components of the peripheral nervous system detect and carry sensory information to the central nervous system. With sustained stimulus, the receptors undergo adaptation. There are two categories of sensory receptors, the general receptors and the special receptors. Let's look at the types of sensory receptors. We have the photoreceptors, which are sensitive to light. We have the chemoreceptors, which are sensitive to chemical changes. We have the thermoreceptors that are stimulated by temperature changes. We have the nociceptors, which are pain receptors. We have the mechanoreceptors, which are stimulated by pressure and movement. We have the proprioceptors, which are specialized mechanoreceptors in the skeletal muscle and joints. Let's take a moment to consider the proprioceptors. The proprioceptors are very important sensory receptors to manual therapists. The major types of proprioceptors are the joint receptors, which sense pressure, tension, and movement, the muscle spindles, which provide the stretch reflex, and the Golgi tendon organs, which provide the inverse stretch reflex. Proprioceptors combine to create the kinesthetic sense, which is the sense of moving body parts as well as the position a body part is in. Now let's take a look at the central nervous system, beginning with the meninges and the cerebrospinal fluid. The meninges is the collective name for the brain and spine membranes. There is the outer layer, which is referred to as the dura mater, the middle layer, which is referred to as the arachnoid mater, and the inner layer, which is referred to as the pia mater. Cerebrospinal fluid circulates through the meninges, the spinal cord, and the brain ventricles. Let's now take a moment to discuss meningitis for this pathology alert. Meningitis is inflammation of the meninges, and it is caused by bacterial, viral, or fungal, even parasitic infection, or even other causes. The signs and symptoms include high fever, severe headache, a rash, a stiff neck, and more. Manual therapists should rule out meningitis in clients with similar symptoms. Otherwise, we should refer the client to his or her physician. Now let's discuss the central nervous system, beginning with the spinal cord. The spinal cord is located within the vertebral foramen of the spinal column. The spinal cord relays information between the brain and the body. It serves as the body's primary reflex center. The posterior or dorsal portion houses the sensory or ascending tracts, while the anterior portion or ventral portion contains motor descending tracts. White matter is composed of myelinated axons, giving it a white appearance, and in contrast, the gray matter gets its coloration from the unmyelinated axons, the cell bodies, the dendrites, and the glial cells it contains. And here we see illustrated the four major regions of the brain. Beginning most superiorly, we see the cerebrum, followed by the diencephalon, we see the cerebellum, and we also see the brainstem. The brainstem is the junction point between the brain and the spinal cord, relaying information. The diencephalon consists of the thalamus and the hypothalamus. The cerebrum is the site for cognition, consciousness, and motor activity. The cerebellum is responsible for voluntary muscle activity, muscle tone, posture, and equilibrium. The limbic system is the memories, emotions, and unconscious survival responses. Now let's take a moment to discuss headaches for this pathology alert. There are three general categories of headaches: tension or stress headaches, cluster headaches, and migraine headaches. Headaches can be a major warning sign of serious pathology. Manual therapy often provides effective treatment, but there are times when we must take note of cautions and contraindications. Now let's take a moment to discuss the somatic division of the peripheral nervous system. Sensory neurons carry information from the receptors. Motor neurons are for voluntary movement. There is only one motor neuron between the spinal cord and the effector. And there is only one type of effector, which is skeletal muscle. Now let's discuss the autonomic division of the peripheral nervous system. There are two motor neurons and ganglion at the synapse. The autonomic effectors are the glands, the organs, and smooth muscles. There are two branches of the autonomic motor division: the sympathetic, which is the body-wide response to stress, fight or flight, and the parasympathetic, which maintains and returns the body to homeostasis after stress, rest, and digest. Most visceral effectors have dual innervation. Now let's discuss how the nervous system works. Each component functions within the integrated whole. Afferent sensory neurons monitor internal and external environments. The spinal cord and brain receive and organize data and formulate responses. The afferent neurons deliver motor commands to the body effectors, and repetition strengthens the neuronal connections. Now let's discuss theories of pain. Pain is defined as a warning sign to withdraw from damaging stimulus and then to guard the injured tissue. The gait control theory says that the pain experience is broken down into 3 stages: the signal stage, the message stage, and the perception stage. The Moussac-Casey conceptual model says pain is the result of interactions within the nervous system. There is the sensory, or the sensation, the cognitive, which is the thinking, and the affective, which is the emotional and feeling. There are 2 broad categories that are based on the underlying causes of pain. The somatogenic pain, which is arising from the body, and this includes the superficial, the deep somatic, and the visceral pain, and there is also referred pain. This is visceral pain felt in body areas separate from the affected organ. Psychogenic pain is pain arising solely from the mind. And here we see illustrated common areas of referred pain. It should be noted that visceral pain often manifests as pain felt in a body area that is distant from the affected organ. Now let's discuss pain management. Drug therapy is widely used, but other effective methods include surgery, acupressure and acupuncture, hydrotherapy, biofeedback, hypnosis, art therapy, music therapy, meditation, visualization, prayer, deep breathing, and even laughter. We must first assess whether or not pain is acute or chronic. Manual therapy has been a proven form of effective treatment for pain management. Different techniques at different stages may influence the pain experience. Let's now take a moment to discuss aging and the nervous system. There is a slight decay of myelin sheaths and a slowing of impulse conduction as a person ages. There is generally a decrease in brain mass and the synaptic connections. There is a gradual decline in the thought processes, memory, balance, and coordinated movement. The rate of changes are largely influenced by lifestyle choices. Now let's take a moment to discuss dementia for this pathology alert. Dementia is caused by degeneration of neuronal tissue in the frontal and temporal lobes. It is characterized by a progressive loss of intellectual ability. It may be accompanied by personality changes, the signs and symptoms of which may be associated with pathologies such as Alzheimer's disease. It should be noted that dementia is not a part of the normal age-related changes that we see taking place. Manual therapy may either be indicated or contraindicated. Okay, so we've reached the end of today's lecture, and for assignment number 7, I'd like for you to list and provide a brief explanation of the 3 functions of the brain, list the 3 types of neurons by function and location of each, name the 4 types of glial cells and describe the basic functions of each, name the 4 regions of the brain, what are the 3 key distinctions between cranial and spinal nerves, list and briefly explain the key steps of nerve impulse conduction. And of course, if you have any difficulty with this assignment, please shoot me an email or send me a text message. My office hours are on Thursdays from 4 to 6 p.m. And with that, I look forward to receiving your assignments. Do have a great week.